Our next chapter is about cellular respiration, which is how our cells and ultimately we are able to breathe and break down food for energy. Aerobic cellular respiration is the main way that our body is able to break down glucose and other foods to get energy. Okay, and it is in the presence of oxygen. So in order for aerobic cellular respiration to happen, we have to have oxygen. So the prefix aero means air or gas. So we need oxygen in order to efficiently break down glucose and other foodstuffs to get energy. So cell respiration is getting energy by breaking down food with oxygen. And the formula is glucose and oxygen yields or breaks down to give us carbon dioxide and water. And this should look so similar. Like if I wrote like sunlight in here, then it should look like a backwards photosynthesis. It's the exact opposite of photosynthesis. There's three main stages of aerobic cellular respiration. The first one is glycolysis. The second one is the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And the third one is the electron transport chain. The first part of aerobic cellular respiration, glycolysis, takes place actually out in the cytoplasm. This part does not require you to have oxygen. And if you're going to write down a definition, I would say that it starts breaking down glucose. Okay, so the prefix glyco means sweet, and lysis, if you remember from lysosomes and hydrolysis, it means to break down. So we're breaking down the sweets or the sugars. Okay, and it ends up producing 2 pyruvic acid molecules, 2 ATP, and 2 NADH. And here's a super complicated way to look at it. You can see that in comes glucose, okay, out comes pyruvate, ATP, and NADH. So you see that some ATP needs to go into it as well. Another picture just showing you an overview. Glycolysis breaks down glucose to pyruvate, occurs in the cytoplasm, gives us a small amount of ATP. Next up comes the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. Okay, what's new about this one is that it happens in the mitochondria. Okay, this is where we take our pyruvic acid or pyruvate and we break it down into carbon dioxide and we load up our electron carriers. Alright, and this is what you get. You get 2 ATP, 6 NADH, 2 FADH. So these are our electron carriers. They're going to be really important for our next step. And we also get carbon dioxide here. Alright, so here's the Krebs cycle. And you see that it is a cycle. Okay? And pyruvate would be somewhere up here. It turns into acetyl-CoA, and then, here's where we get our electron carriers loaded up. We get a little bit of ATP, more electron carriers. Hey, look, cool, another summary picture just to show you that after glycolysis happens, pyruvates turn into acetyl-CoA, goes into the mitochondria, goes through the Krebs cycle, produces a little bit of ATP. Alright, so I'm about to make this real easy for you. This is part 3, first of all, of aerobic cellular respiration. And I'm just going to tell you what you need to know. It occurs in the mitochondria, okay? It makes a lot of ATP, and it uses oxygen to make a lot of ATP. Alright, it also uses those high energy electron carriers, that NADH and the FADH too. And by a lot of ATP, I mean 32. Hey, look at that. This super complicated diagram. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that, again, using the energy carriers here, okay, to make a lot of ATP. It also uses oxygen. Oxygen energy carriers makes a lot of ATP. Overview of all of aerobic respiration starts with glycolysis, which occurs in the cytosol or the cytoplasm. Turns glucose into pyruvate, gives us 2 ATP. And it also loads up some of our electron carriers to be used later. Okay, step 2, citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle occurs in the mitochondria, alright, also gives us 2 ATP and sends some electron carriers along their way. Alright, third step is electron transport chain. Uses the electron carriers and that oxygen, super important, uses the electron carriers and oxygen to make a whopping 32 ATP. And this part also occurs in the mitochondria. Total energy received from aerobic cellular respiration, you get 2 from glycolysis, 2 from the Krebs cycle, 32 from the electron transport chain for a total of 36 ATP. ATP or cell energy, which is our cell's chemical energy. Alright, now this is kind of cool. It shows you, depending on what kind of foods we're talking about here, or organic compounds, where you're going to start in the process of aerobic cellular respiration. So a carbohydrate, since those are our sugars, they're always going to start with glycolysis. So they'll always begin in glycolysis. Proteins, super cool, can either begin at the end of glycolysis, at the beginning of the Krebs cycle, or in the middle of the Krebs cycle. Alright, fats, well, the glycerol part of the fat, or lipid, must go through glycolysis, and the fatty acid chain can actually start at acetyl-CoA or right before the Krebs cycle. And then none of them start here at the electron transport chain, you notice. The other kind of cellular respiration is anaerobic cellular respiration. So AN means without, aero means without air. So without air or without oxygen. So this is cellular respiration without oxygen. And it's called fermentation. So we only have glycolysis and then fermentation. And we only have glycolysis because it does not need oxygen. Alright, the first type of anaerobic cell respiration that we're going to talk about is lactic acid fermentation. And this happens when oxygen runs out or is not available. So this goes on actually in our bodies. You know, when you get a muscle cramp, right, during rapid exercise. Okay, so we're still needing energy, so our body still needs to do some kind of respiration. So it does this respiration. And it only gives us 2 ATP. It also produces lactic acid, which when we get a lactic acid buildup in our muscle cells, that's what causes the cramp. Alright, this is also present in cheese, yogurt, meat products, and pickled vegetables. Alright, so here it is in all its glory. Lactic acid fermentation. It takes glucose, makes 2 ATP using the energy carrier, and it also produces lactate or lactic acid. Alcoholic fermentation. So this is done with yeast and other microorganisms. They can actually make energy without any oxygen at all. So they're in an environment without any oxygen. And their equation is pyruvic acid plus an energy carrier will give alcohol, carbon dioxide, a gas, and it'll also change that energy carrier back. Or electron carrier back, I'm sorry. Alright, this only produces 2 ATP, and it's actually used in making bread, wine, and beer. And here it is in all its glory. Alcohol fermentation, again, only goes through glycolysis, only gives us 2 ATP, still using that electron carrier to produce that ATP, but instead it produces ethanol, which is an alcohol. Alright, so I'm just going to show you a little clip of this video, but it's to show you what cell respiration is used for, and that it is important.
As this mountain biker heads up the trail, the breakfast he ate this morning is being burned to power his bike ride. His breathing rate increases as his leg muscles demand more oxygen to burn more fuel. Let's zoom down to where this fuel is burned, our cells. Here, the blood vessel on the left delivers fuel and oxygen to a single muscle cell. In cellular respiration, Energy in fuel is converted to ATP, shown here as starbursts. Most ATP is made in the cell's mitochondria. ATP powers the work of the cell, such as contraction.
Okay, and if you remember, the ATP is made in the mitochondria because, or most of it's made in the mitochondria because it goes through the electron transport chain, which is what needs the oxygen. Okay, so let's say that this guy ran out of oxygen for his cells. He would go through that lactic acid fermentation and he would get a little cramp in his muscles. So now keep in mind, you don't actually have to be doing intense physical workouts to have cell respiration going on. It's going on as we speak right now. You're breathing out carbon dioxide. Guess what? Your body's been doing aerobic cell respiration. Cool stuff, I know.